The ice cream that shattered everything. When German nurses saw ice cream in an American POW camp, their reaction was unbelievable. It was the sound that got their attention first. A mechanical whirring, a motor running, something industrial and out of place in the quiet afternoon of the Arizona POW camp. Nurse Helene Schäfer looked up from the medical supplies she was organizing, bandages, antiseptic, the basic materials the Americans had provided for the camp infirmary, and turned toward the unusual noise. Through the window of the medical barracks, she could see a crowd forming near the main courtyard. American soldiers, German prisoners, all gathering around something she couldn't quite see. "What is that sound?" asked Nurse Frida Hartmann, who was inventorying medications at the next table. Frida was 38, the oldest of the 12. German nurses in the camp, and she'd served in field hospitals from Poland to France to the final desperate days in Berlin. She'd seen everything war could show a person, or so she thought. "I don't know," Helene admitted. She was 26, had been a nurse for only 4 years before being conscripted into military service. Before the war, she'd worked in a children's hospital in Munich. She'd spent her days caring for sick kids, reading them stories, making them laugh despite their pain. That felt like a different lifetime, a different world, a different Helene who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. The whirring sound grew louder, accompanied now by excited voices, American voices speaking rapid English that Helene couldn't fully understand. But she recognized the tone, excitement, anticipation, joy. Emotions that felt almost alien after 6 years of war and 3 months of captivity. "Should we go look?" Frida asked, but her voice was uncertain. The Americans had been kind, surprisingly, unsettlingly kind, but the German nurses maintained careful boundaries. They didn't wander. They didn't get curious. They stayed in their assigned areas, did their work, and tried not to think about what waited for them back in Germany, if there even was a Germany to go back to. But then Private Miller appeared in the doorway, the young translator who'd been assigned to work with the medical staff. He was grinning, actually grinning, in a way that made Helene's stomach twist with confusion. Nobody should be that happy in a prison camp. "Nurses, you should come see this. Well, you have to see it. Trust me." Trust. Such a dangerous word. Trust an American soldier who was supposed to be the enemy? Trust the people who'd bombed German cities into rubble? Trust the nation that had defeated the mighty Wehrmacht? But Private Miller had always been kind. He'd helped translate medical terms. He'd found extra bandages when they ran low. He'd once spent 2 hours helping Helene understand an American medical textbook, patiently explaining concepts in his broken German mixed with medical Latin that worked better than either language alone. "What is it?" Helene asked, setting down her clipboard. "Ice cream," Miller said, still grinning. "The camp got an ice cream maker. They're making ice cream for everyone, including you all. Captain's orders. Everyone in camp gets some, no exceptions." Helene stared at him. Ice cream. The words didn't make sense. Not here, not now, not for prisoners. Ice cream was luxury. Ice cream was peacetime. Ice cream was something from before the war, before the rationing, before everything became about survival instead of living. She hadn't tasted ice cream in 6 years. Most of the younger nurses had never tasted it at all. "That can't be right," Frida said flatly. "You're mistaken. They wouldn't waste resources on—" "It's not a waste," Miller interrupted gently. "It's Saturday, the 4th of July, American Independence Day, big holiday. They always make ice cream on the 4th, always. And Captain Rodriguez said every person in this camp is getting some. That includes POWs. That includes you." He gestured toward the door. "Come on, before it melts." Before it melts. As if ice cream melting was the concern. As if they lived in a world where frozen desserts were normal enough to worry about their temperature. Helene felt something crack in her chest. Not break, but crack, like ice on a river when spring finally comes. She stood up, her legs shaky, and looked at Frida. Should we? Frida's face was a mask of conflict, military discipline warring with human curiosity. Finally, she nodded. If they're ordering us to come, we come. But we maintain composure. We represent Germany. We don't act like children being offered candy. They walked toward the courtyard, joined by other German nurses from different barracks. By the time they reached the crowd, all 12 nurses were there, 12 women aged 19 to 38, all trained medical professionals, all veterans of the Wehrmacht Medical Corps, all trying desperately to maintain dignity while their hearts hammered with confused anticipation. And then they saw it. The ice cream maker sat on a long table in the courtyard, a mechanical miracle that seemed to belong to a different universe. It was large, industrial, the kind of machine that suggested abundance rather than scarcity. And American soldier was cranking it, actually cranking it by hand, which seemed wasteful of human effort until Helene realized that was the point. This wasn't about efficiency. This was about celebration, about taking time to make something special. Next to the ice cream maker were bowls, dozens of bowls, and spoons, real metal spoons, not the wooden or makeshift utensils they'd used during the war's final months. There were toppings, chocolate sauce, something red that might be strawberry, nuts, whipped cream in a bowl so white it looked like snow. It was obscene. It was impossible. It was more sugar and cream in one place than Helene had seen in years. But the real shock was yet to come, because when the first serving of ice cream came out of the machine, pale, creamy, perfect, the American soldier didn't serve it to another American. He looked directly at the group of German nurses and said something in English. Private Miller translated, "Ladies first. Nurses first. You take care of everyone else. Today, we take care of you." Nobody moved. 12 German nurses stood frozen, appropriately considering, staring at this offering that made no sense in any framework they understood. Prisoners didn't get ice cream. Enemies didn't get treats. Defeated soldiers didn't get served first, with courtesy and something that looked disturbingly like respect. "Go on," Miller urged gently. "It's really okay. I promise it's not poisoned or drugged or a trick. It's just ice cream. Vanilla. American vanilla ice cream on the 4th of July. This is what we do. This is tradition. Tradition." The word hit Helene hard, because tradition implied continuity, normalcy, a world where things like holidays and ice cream still mattered. Germany had lost its traditions in the fire of total war. They'd sacrificed everything, comfort, culture, morality, on the altar of military necessity. And they'd still lost. They'd given up everything and gained nothing. Meanwhile, America had fought a war on 2 fronts, defeated both Germany and Japan, and still had the resources, the will, the fundamental sanity to make ice cream for prisoners on a holiday. Nurse Kirsten Adler, the youngest at 19, took a step forward. She'd been conscripted straight out of nursing school in 1944, had served for less than a year before capture. She barely remembered peacetime, barely remembered a world where young women worried about boys and dresses instead of amputations and infections. "May I?" she whispered in German, looking at Frida for permission. Frida wanted to say no. Helene could see it in her face, the instinct to maintain discipline, to refuse this offering, to keep their dignity as conquered but unbroken soldiers. But Frida was also human, also tired, also hungry for something besides survival. "Yes," she finally said. "You may." Kirsten approached the table like she was approaching something holy. The American soldier smiled, genuinely smiled, and handed her a bowl. The ice cream was pristine, white, perfect. He pointed to the toppings, asking a question in English. Kirsten shook her head, overwhelmed. Just the ice cream? Just that impossible, beautiful, frozen miracle? She took the spoon. "Put it in the ice cream," lifted it to her mouth. And the moment it touched her tongue, Kirsten Adler's face transformed. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened in shock, and then she started crying. Not quiet tears, but heaving, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. The bowl nearly fell from her hands, but the American soldier caught it, steadied it, held it for her while she cried. And that's when something nobody expected happened. The crying spread like a contagion. Nurse after nurse stepped forward, accepted their bowl of ice cream, tasted it, and broke down. Some sobbed like Kirsten. Others cried silently, tears streaming down faces that tried to maintain composure. Some laughed and cried at the same time, a hysterical mixture of emotions that had been bottled up for years suddenly exploding out. Helene took her bowl with shaking hands. The ice cream was cold, so cold it almost hurt. She put a spoonful in her mouth and the flavor hit her like a physical blow. Sweet, creamy, rich, cold. It tasted like childhood summers before the world caught fire. It tasted like her mother's kitchen on Sunday afternoons. It tasted like the world she'd lost and thought could never exist again. She tasted vanilla and milk and sugar, and underneath all of that, she tasted peace. She tasted a world where people made frozen desserts just because they could, just because it was nice, just because life should have moments of sweetness even when everything else was terrible. Helene didn't just cry. She collapsed, literally sat down on the ground, her legs giving out. The bowl of ice cream clutched to her chest like it was made of diamonds. Around her, other nurses were having similar reactions. Grown women, trained professionals, veterans of war, all reduced to sobbing children by vanilla ice cream. The American soldiers looked panicked at first, unsure what to do. But Captain Rodriguez, the officer in charge of the camp, just watched with an expression of profound sadness. "Let them cry," he said quietly. "God knows they've earned it. Let them cry and eat ice cream and remember what it feels like to be human." Frida was the last to take a bowl. She'd maintained her composure watching the others break down, but when she finally tasted the ice cream, her face crumpled like paper. She stood there, rigid with military discipline, tears pouring down her face while she ate methodically, spoonful after spoonful, as if this was her duty. As if she owed it to herself, to Germany, to every patient she'd watched die, to every prayer she'd stopped believing in. She owed it to all of them to taste this ice cream and remember that once upon a time, the world had been kind. Private Miller stood next to Helene, who was still sitting on the ground, and he said gently in German, "In America, ice cream is not special. It's normal, common. Kids eat it every week in summer. We have ice cream trucks that drive through neighborhoods playing music. You can buy it in stores. It's cheap, ordinary." He paused, watching her cry. "But I'm starting to understand it's not ordinary everywhere. I'm starting to understand what we take for granted." Helene looked up at him through her tears. "When did you last eat ice cream?" she asked in broken English. "Last week," he admitted. "There's a parlor in town. I go there sometimes on my day off. Get a chocolate sundae. Just because." He looked at the crying German nurses, at this scene of women shattered by frozen vanilla. "I'll never take it for granted again. I promise you that." The ice cream social, as Captain Rodriguez called it, lasted for over an hour. The German nurses sat in small groups throughout the courtyard, eating their ice cream slowly, savoring every spoonful, like it might be their last. Some went back for seconds when offered. Others couldn't finish their first bowl because their stomachs, unaccustomed to such richness, rebelled. But everyone tried. Everyone tasted. Everyone remembered. Helene found herself sitting with 3 other nurses. Kirsten, who'd been first to taste it. Margareta, a surgical nurse from Hamburg. And Sophie, a quiet woman from Bavaria who rarely spoke about her experiences. They ate in silence at first, each lost in their own memories, their own grief, their own confusion about what this moment meant. "My daughter loved ice cream," Sophie said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time she'd mentioned having a child. "Emma, she was 6 when I was conscripted in 1943. I left her with my mother in Munich. I kept telling myself I'd be back soon, that the war would end, that I'd take her for ice cream again. We had a favorite shop near the Marienplatz. Every Sunday after church we'd go there. She always ordered chocolate with sprinkles." Sophie took another spoonful, her hands trembling. "I received word 2 months ago. The bombing raid in January. My mother's building took a direct hit. Emma was 7 years old. She never got to taste ice cream again after I left. The silence that followed was suffocating. What could anyone say? War had stolen Sophie's daughter, stolen her future, stolen everything. And now she was sitting in an enemy prison camp eating ice cream while her child lay dead in Munich rubble. The cruelty of it was overwhelming. "I'm sorry," Helene finally said, knowing how inadequate the words were. Don't be, Sophie replied. And her voice was strange, not angry, not sad, just empty. This is what we chose. What Germany chose. We started this war. We invaded other countries. We killed other people's children. Why should mine be spared? Why should any of ours? She looked down at her ice cream. The Americans killed Emma with their bombs. But we created the world where that became necessary. We made ourselves the enemy. We made our children targets. This ice cream, she lifted the bowl. This is what the other side looks like. This is what we were fighting against. People who waste resources on frozen desserts for holidays. People who have so much they can give it to prisoners. People who didn't deserve to be our enemies, but we made them anyway. Margaret, the surgical nurse, shook her head. Sophie, you can't blame yourself for— Why not? Sophie interrupted, and now there was fire in her voice. I wore the uniform. I served the Reich. I patched up soldiers so they could go back and kill more people. I was part of the machine that dropped bombs on London, on Warsaw, on everywhere. Maybe I didn't personally kill anyone, but my hands kept the killing going. So yes, I can blame myself. I do blame myself, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. She took another bite of ice cream, and tears streamed down her face. Emma loved chocolate, with sprinkles. She'd get it all over her face and laugh. God, she had the best laugh. They sat in silence, 4 women eating ice cream and drowning in grief. Around them, similar scenes played out, nurses confronting memories, losses, guilt, all triggered by something as simple as vanilla ice cream on a summer afternoon. The Americans watched with expressions ranging from confusion to sympathy to their own kind of grief. Because these young soldiers were learning something too, that the enemy wasn't faceless monsters, but women with dead daughters and shattered dreams and trauma so deep it surfaced at the taste of frozen dessert. But the real shock was yet to come. Because after the ice cream was served and eaten, after the crying had subsided to occasional sniffles, Captain Rodriguez stood up on a makeshift platform and spoke. Private Miller translated, his voice growing more emotional as he conveyed the captain's words. Ladies and gentlemen, and yes, I'm including our German guests in that greeting. Today is Independence Day, the day America celebrates freedom. Independence, and the principles we believe, make a good society. Principles like democracy, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. Rodriguez paused, looking directly at the German nurses. I know that some of you have been taught that these principles are weak, that democracy is chaos, that equality is impossible, that the pursuit of happiness is selfish individualism. You've been taught that strength comes from authoritarian control, from racial hierarchy, from sacrificing individual rights for the collective good of the state. The German nurses shifted uncomfortably. This was veering into dangerous territory, political lectures, ideological warfare, the kind of thing that felt like a trap. But Rodriguez continued, his voice gentle rather than accusatory. I'm not here to lecture you about politics. I'm here to show you something more powerful than any speech. I'm here to show you what these principles look like in practice. We just gave you ice cream. Not because we had to. Not because it serves any strategic purpose. Not because it makes us look good. Frankly, some people back home will be angry that we're coddling the enemy. We gave you ice cream because in America, we believe that all people, even enemies, even prisoners, deserve to have moments of joy. Deserve to taste something sweet. Deserve to be reminded that life can be good. He gestured to the empty bowls scattered throughout the courtyard. This ice cream represents something bigger than dessert. It represents a society that has so much abundance that we can afford to be generous. A society where even ordinary people eat ice cream regularly, where children grow up expecting treats and holidays and happiness. Not because we're better people than Germans, we're not. Americans can be cruel, racist, greedy, all the terrible things humans can be. But our system, democracy, capitalism, individual rights, it creates prosperity. It creates abundance. It creates a world where ice cream on the 4th of July is normal, expected, celebrated. Rodriguez's voice grew stronger. Germany chose a different path. Your leaders promised you glory, power, dominance. They promised that if you just conquered enough territory, killed enough enemies, proved your racial superiority, then you'd be prosperous and happy. And what did that get you? Rubble, starvation, dead children. Total defeat. Your cities are destroyed. Your economy is gone. Your people are starving. And here you are, prisoners in Arizona, crying over vanilla ice cream because it's the first kind thing you've experienced in years. The words stung, but they were true. Every nurse knew it. They'd watched Germany collapse. They'd seen the promises of the Reich revealed as lies. They'd survived on bark soup and ersatz coffee while being told that victory was just around the corner. They'd watched children starve while resources went to the military. They'd lived the failure of everything they'd been taught to believe. I'm not saying this to be cruel, Rodriguez continued, his voice softening. I'm saying this because you're going home soon. Back to Germany. Back to a country that needs to rebuild not just its buildings, but its entire way of thinking. And when you go back, you're going to face a choice. You can cling to the old ideology, insist that Germany just needed to fight harder or longer, maintain that the principles of the Reich were sound but poorly executed. Or you can look at this ice cream and understand what it represents. You can choose to build a new Germany. A Germany based on democracy, human rights, prosperity for everyone instead of domination of others. Things were just starting to look better when a voice rang out from the group of German nurses. It was Frida, standing up with military posture, her face stern. Captain Rodriguez, with respect, you speak as if the choice is simple. As if we can just decide to forget everything we were taught, everything we believed, everything we fought for. But it's not that simple. You've given us ice cream, yes. You've been kind, yes. But kindness doesn't erase the past. It doesn't bring back our dead. It doesn't rebuild our cities. It doesn't answer the fundamental question. If America is so right and Germany was so wrong, why did it take 6 years of total war to prove it? Why did millions have to die before we learned this lesson? The courtyard fell silent. Every eye turned to Rodriguez, waiting to see how he'd respond to this challenge. He looked at Frida for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're absolutely right, ma'am. It's not simple. Nothing about this is simple. And you're right that kindness doesn't erase the past or bring back the dead. As for why it took 6 years, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Because your leaders were good at lying. Because propaganda works. Because people believe what they want to believe, especially when the truth is uncomfortable. And because, frankly, the world didn't act fast enough to stop Germany before it became too powerful. He stepped down from the platform and walked toward Frida, stopping a respectful distance away. But here's what I want you to understand. This ice cream, this kindness we're showing you, it's not about making you forget. It's about making you remember. Remember that there's a different way to live. Remember that prosperity doesn't require conquest. Remember that happiness doesn't require someone else's suffering. And remember that when you have a choice between hatred and humanity, between vengeance and generosity, between the old way and a new way, remember which one gave you ice cream. Frida stared at him, her face unreadable. Then slowly she sat back down. The conversation was over, but the seeds had been planted. All through the courtyard, German nurses sat with their thoughts, their memories, their impossible choices. The ice cream was gone, melted into memory, but its impact remained. That evening, the nurses gathered in their barracks for what had become an informal tradition, a discussion group where they processed their experiences, their guilt, their confusion about the future. Tonight's topic was obvious: the ice cream, what it meant, what they should do with this knowledge. I don't want to go home, Kirsten said suddenly, her voice small. She was sitting on her bunk, knees pulled to her chest. I know that's terrible. I know I should want to see Germany, should want to help rebuild, but I don't. I want to stay here, where there's ice cream and kindness, and no one asking me to explain why I wore that uniform. You can't stay, Frida said, but not unkindly. None of us can. This is temporary safety, but it's not real life. Real life is back in Germany, dealing with the consequences of our choices. Our choices? Margarete challenged. I was conscripted. I didn't choose to be a nurse in the Wehrmacht. I didn't choose to serve the Reich. I was told what to do and I did it because the alternative was prison or death. How much of this was really our choice? All of it, Sophie said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. We chose to believe the propaganda. We chose not to ask questions when things didn't make sense. We chose to look away when people were arrested, when neighbors disappeared, when the camps were built. We chose comfort over courage, convenience over conscience. Maybe we didn't personally commit atrocities, but we enabled them by our silence, our obedience, our willingness to accept easy answers. So yes, these were our choices. And now we have to live with them. The room fell silent. Because Sophie was right, and they all knew it. They'd made choices, maybe not big, dramatic choices, but 1,000 small ones. The choice to not speak up. The choice to follow orders without question. The choice to believe that someone else was responsible for morality, for ethics, for deciding what was right and wrong. They'd abdicated their conscience to authority, and this was the result. So what do? Helene asked. We can't change the past. We can't bring back the dead. We can't undo what Germany did. So what do we do now? We tell the truth, Frida said, and her voice had changed. Less military command, more human conviction. We go home and we tell people what we saw here. We tell them about the ice cream and what it represents. We tell them about American kindness and German cruelty. We tell them that the Reich lied to us, used us, destroyed us. We tell them that there's a better way, and we've tasted it, and it tastes like vanilla ice cream on a summer afternoon. They won't believe us, Margaret protested. They'll call us traitors, collaborators. They'll say we've been brainwashed by American propaganda. Some will, Frida agreed. Maybe most will, but some won't. Some will listen. Some will remember that before the war, before the Reich, Germany had art and music and philosophy, and yes, ice cream. Germany was a good place once. It can be again, but only if people like us go back and tell the truth, no matter how unpopular that makes us. Helene thought about this. Thought about going back to Munich, to the rubble of her old hospital, to a country that had lost everything. Thought about trying to convince bitter, starving, traumatized people that democracy and kindness were better than the authoritarian certainty they'd known. It seemed impossible. It seemed like a task too big for one person, or 12 people, or 100. But then she remembered the ice cream. The taste of it, the sweetness, the cold. The way it had broken through years of trauma and reminded her that joy was possible. That kindness existed. That the world could be good. If ice cream could do that, if something so simple could crack open her heart after years of it being closed, maybe words could too. Maybe truth could. Maybe courage could. I'll do it, Helene said. I'll go home and tell the truth. I don't know if anyone will listen. I don't know if it will make a difference. But I'll try. Because if we don't try, if we just accept defeat and resignation and the idea that nothing can change, then Germany really is lost forever. One by one, other voices joined in. I'll try. Me too. I will. Not everyone. Some were too broken, too traumatized, too afraid. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to plant seeds that might, decades later, grow into something better. And that's when something nobody expected happened. The barracks door opened, and Captain Rodriguez walked in, followed by Private Miller and another soldier carrying a large box. The nurses stood at attention automatically, military training overriding everything else. At ease, Rodriguez said, waving them down. This isn't an inspection. This is something I'm probably going to get in trouble for, but I'm doing it anyway. He nodded to the soldier, who opened the box. Inside were 12 small containers, each carefully wrapped. Ice cream, Rodriguez explained through Miller's translation. Personal servings. They won't last long, maybe a day before they melt completely. But I wanted each of you to have some to take back to your barracks. To eat tonight, or tomorrow, or whenever you need a reminder. A reminder that sweetness exists, that kindness is real, that the world can be better than what you've known. He walked to each nurse, personally handing them a container. When he reached Helene, he paused. I heard what you said just now, about going home and telling the truth. That takes courage. More courage than fighting in a war, honestly. Fighting is easy when everyone around you is doing it. But standing alone, telling unpopular truths, trying to change minds one conversation at a time, that's real bravery. I hope you find the strength to do it. Helene took the container, feeling its cold weight in her hands. Thank you, Captain. For the ice cream. For the kindness. For showing us that the enemy isn't always who we're told it is. Rodriguez smiled sadly. We were never really enemies. Just people on opposite sides of a terrible war. But maybe next time, if there is a next time, We can skip the war and go straight to the ice cream. That night, Helene sat on her bunk with her container of ice cream cradled in her lap like a precious artifact. She'd opened it once, just to look at it, to confirm it was real. Vanilla, pure white, already starting to soften in the Arizona heat, despite the container's insulation. She'd closed it quickly, not ready to eat it yet. Not ready to let go of the anticipation, the promise of sweetness, the tangible proof that kindness existed. Around her, other nurses were having similar moments. Some ate their ice cream immediately, savoring every spoonful in the darkness. Others saved it, rationing it out over hours. Kirsten ate half and saved half, wrapping the container in her spare uniform to keep it cold as long as possible. Sophie stared at hers without opening it, as if the unopened container held more value than the actual dessert, a Schrodinger's ice cream that could remain perfect as long as she didn't observe it melting. "What are you waiting for?" Frida asked, sitting down on the bunk next to Helene. She'd already finished her own serving, eating it methodically like medicine. And now she looked tired, not physically tired, but soul tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too much for too long. "I don't know," Helene admitted. "Once I eat it, it's gone. Once it's gone, this moment ends. And I want to remember this moment. I want to hold on to it." "Memory doesn't work that way," Frida said, but her voice was gentle. "You won't remember it better by not eating it. You'll just remember the anticipation, which isn't the same thing. The taste, that's what you need to lock in your memory. The actual experience, not the idea of it." Helene knew she was right. She opened the container and took a small spoonful. The ice cream had softened more, becoming almost liquid at the edges, but the center was still firm and cold. She put it in her mouth and closed her eyes, trying to memorize every aspect of the sensation. The cold that made her teeth ache. The sweetness that flooded her taste buds. The creamy texture that coated her tongue. The vanilla flavor, simple, pure, uncomplicated by war or guilt or loss. "My mother used to say that food is memory," Helene said quietly. "That's why family recipes matter so much. Because when you eat your grandmother's apple cake, you're not just tasting apples and sugar. You're tasting Christmas mornings and childhood and love. You're tasting everything that was good about being young and safe and loved." She took another spoonful. "This ice cream, it's going to be like that. 20 years from now, if I taste vanilla ice cream, I'll remember this exact moment. This barracks, this conversation, the way the desert air feels at night, the sound of other women breathing in the darkness. And I'll remember that once, the enemy gave me ice cream and taught me that kindness could survive even war." Frida was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I had a husband." "Did you know that, Dieter? We married in 1935, right after I finished nursing school. He was a teacher, history teacher, loved his job, loved his students. When the war started, they conscripted him despite his poor eyesight. Sent him to France. He wrote me letters every week, beautiful letters about how much he missed me, how he couldn't wait to come home, how we'd start a family when it was all over." Her voice cracked slightly. "He died in 1941, pneumonia in a field hospital. Not even killed in combat. Just got sick and died because the medical care was inadequate, because resources went to the war effort instead of keeping soldiers alive. I wasn't even there. I was serving in a different unit, a different country. I never got to say goodbye. I'm so sorry, Frida. After he died, I threw myself into work. Stopped thinking about the future, about family, about anything except the next patient, the next surgery, the next shift. Emotions were a luxury I couldn't afford. Grief was weakness. Love was dangerous. So I became hard, efficient. I became Sergeant Hartman, the nurse who never broke, never cried, never let herself feel anything." She looked at Helene. "And then today vanilla ice cream broke me. 10 years of controlled grief released by frozen dessert." Dieter would have laughed at that. He always said I took everything too seriously, that I needed to learn to enjoy small pleasures. Guess he was right. Helene reached over and squeezed Frida's hand. They sat like that for a while, two women eating melting ice cream in a prison camp, sharing grief and memory, and something that might have been hope. But the real shock was yet to come. Because the next morning, during routine roll call, Captain Rodriguez made an announcement that changed everything. The repatriation schedule had been accelerated. The German nurses would be going home in 2 weeks, not months as previously expected, but 2 weeks. The news hit like a physical blow. 2 weeks, 14 days. Then back to Germany, to uncertainty, to rubble and starvation and whatever consequences awaited women who'd worn the Wehrmacht uniform. The remaining days took on a strange quality, both too fast and too slow. Fast because every moment felt precious now, every meal and conversation and small kindness taking on enormous significance. Slow because the dread of what awaited them in Germany made time feel heavy, oppressive, like wading through mud. The Americans, to their credit, tried to prepare them. They held classes about what conditions were like in occupied Germany. They taught basic English phrases that might be useful. They provided information about Red Cross services, displaced persons assistance, how to locate missing family members. They gave each nurse a package to take home, basic supplies, some food, a little money, and a document certifying their status as repatriated POWs, which might provide some protection against accusations of collaboration. And on their last night in camp, Captain Rodriguez arranged one final surprise. Another ice cream social, but this time more elaborate. They'd somehow procured chocolate and strawberry in addition to vanilla. There were cookies, actual cookies, crisp and sweet. There was coffee, real coffee, not the ersatz grain substitute. There was music from a radio, American swing that sounded alien and wonderful. "This is your goodbye party," Rodriguez announced through Miller's translation. "In America, when someone leaves, we celebrate them. We send them off with good memories and full stomachs. So tonight, eat, drink, dance if you want to. Be young women at a party instead of soldiers at a prison camp. Just for tonight. Pretend the war never happened, and you're just visitors who are heading home." It was an impossible request, but they tried. The nurses ate ice cream, all 3 flavors this time, comparing them, debating which was best. Chocolate won by a narrow margin, with its rich, complex flavor that seemed almost decadent after years of deprivation. Strawberry came second, bright and fruity and tasting like summer. Vanilla, which had seemed so miraculous days ago, now felt almost ordinary by comparison. But that ordinariness was its own kind of miracle. The realization that in a normal world, vanilla ice cream really was just vanilla ice cream, not a profound philosophical statement about prosperity and kindness. Some of the nurses danced, awkward at first, self-conscious about moving their bodies in ways that weren't military precision. But the music was infectious, the rhythm impossible to resist. American soldiers joined in, teaching them basic swing steps, laughing when they stumbled, applauding when they got it right. For a few hours, the courtyard stopped being a prison camp and became just a party. Young people dancing and eating and enjoying being alive. Helene found herself dancing with Private Miller, who was surprisingly graceful despite his gangly frame. "You're a good dancer," she said in English, her pronunciation still rough but improving. "My mom made me take lessons," he admitted, grinning. "I hated it at the time. What teenage boy wants to learn to dance? But now I'm glad. Turns out it's a useful skill." He spun her carefully, making sure she didn't lose her balance. "Can I ask you something? What are you going to do when you get home? Do you have family waiting?" Helene's smile faltered. "I don't know if anyone is waiting. My parents were in Munich. I haven't heard from them since 1944. The Red Cross has no record of them in any displaced persons camp, which probably means—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I have an aunt in Bavaria, in a small village that maybe wasn't bombed. I'll try to find her, try to figure out what's left, and then I'll be a nurse again. Germany will need nurses. There will be wounded, sick, traumatized people everywhere. And I'll tell people about this place, about American kindness, about ice cream and dancing and the possibility that the world doesn't have to be built on hatred." She looked up at him. "Will anyone believe me?" Miller was quiet for a moment, considering. "Some will, some won't, but that's not the point. The point is to tell the truth anyway, to plant seeds even if you don't know if they'll grow. My grandfather used to say that civilization is just millions of people making small good choices every day. You can't change everything, but you can change your little corner of the world. You can be kind when the world says to be cruel. You can tell the truth when lies are easier. You can remember that enemies are just people who've been told to hate you. And maybe, just maybe, if enough people remember that, We won't need another war. The song ended, and they stopped dancing. But Helene didn't let go of his hand immediately. Thank you, Private Miller, for everything. For translating, for being patient with my terrible English, for helping us understand that Americans aren't monsters. You've made a difference, even if you never know how much. Miller squeezed her hand once, then let go. Write to me if you can. If you make it to Bavaria, if you find your aunt, if you rebuild your life, write and tell me. I'd like to know that you're okay. That this all meant something. I will, Helene promised. I'll write and tell you about the new Germany we're building. The one with ice cream. Things were just starting to look better when Sophie appeared at Helene's side, her face pale, her hands shaking. I need to tell you something, she said in German, her voice urgent. Before we leave, before I lose my courage. They moved away from the music, to a quiet corner of the courtyard. Sophie's hands were trembling so badly that Helene took them in her own, trying to provide some stability. What is it? What's wrong? I lied, Sophie whispered. About my daughter. About Emma. She didn't die in January. She died in 1943, not from bombs, from starvation. My mother wrote me that Emma was getting weaker, that there wasn't enough food, that she cried all the time from hunger. I was stationed in France then, in a hospital that had adequate rations. Not good food, but adequate. And I didn't send any home. I didn't ask for leave. I didn't do anything because I was angry. Angry that I'd been conscripted. Angry that my life had been stolen. Angry at my mother for being weak. Angry at Emma for existing and complicating everything. Tears streamed down Sophie's face. She was 6 years old and she starved to death while I had enough to eat. And I didn't save her because I was too selfish, too angry, too focused on my own suffering. So when I said the Americans killed her, that was a lie. I killed her. My neglect, my selfishness, my failure to be a mother when she needed me most. Helene felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She didn't know what to say. What comfort could possibly address this level of guilt? Sophie, don't tell me it's not my fault, Sophie interrupted. Don't tell me the war killed her, or circumstances, or anything else. I made a choice. I chose myself over my child, and I've been carrying that for 2 years, lying about it, pretending she died in a bombing so people would pity me instead of judging me. But tonight with the ice cream and the dancing and the kindness, I can't carry the lie anymore. I need someone to know the truth. I need to say it out loud. I killed my daughter through my selfishness and cowardice, and I'll carry that until the day I die. Helene held Sophie while she sobbed, offering the only comfort she could. Physical presence, silent witness, the acknowledgement that she'd heard and didn't turn away. Because what else could she do? Sophie was right. This was her guilt to carry, her choice, her consequence. But maybe, being able to finally tell the truth was the first step toward living with it. Maybe confession wasn't absolution, but it was at least the end of the lie. When Sophie's sobs finally subsided, Helene said quietly, "Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with the truth. And Sophie, I can't forgive you for Emma, that's not my place. But I can tell you this. You're going home to a Germany full of children who need nurses. Children who are hungry, sick, traumatized. You can't save Emma, but you can save others. Not as payment, not as redemption. You don't get to erase your guilt by helping other children. But you can choose to be better going forward. You can be the mother to other children that you weren't to your own. That won't fix anything. But it's something. It's more than nothing." Sophie nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "You're right. It's not redemption, but it's purpose, and maybe purpose is enough to keep living on." The party continued around them, music and laughter and ice cream. But Helene felt the weight of Sophie's confession settling over her like a cloak. This was the real cost of war, not just the dead, but the living who carried unbearable guilt, who'd made impossible choices or failed to make necessary ones, who'd have to live with their actions or inactions for the rest of their lives. Ice cream couldn't fix that. Kindness couldn't erase it. But maybe, just maybe, it could provide enough sweetness to make the bitterness bearable. The next morning, they left. 12 German nurses loaded onto a truck, headed for the train that would take them to a processing center, then to a ship, then across the Atlantic to whatever remained of Germany. Captain Rodriguez and Private Miller were there to see them off. along with many of the American soldiers who'd staffed the camp. "I wish I could promise you'll find your homes intact and your families alive," Rodriguez said in his farewell speech. "But I can't. I can only promise that America will help Germany rebuild. We'll provide food aid, reconstruction assistance, support for democratic institutions. We won't abandon you to starve or collapse into chaos. Because we've learned something too, that peace isn't just the absence of war. Peace is active work. Peace is feeding your former enemies. Peace is teaching democracy instead of imposing dictatorship. Peace is ice cream on the 4th of July for everyone, even prisoners." He looked at each nurse in turn. "Go home, tell the truth. Be kind when the world tells you to be hard. Build the Germany you wish you'd had. And remember that somewhere in Arizona, a group of American soldiers gave you ice cream and treated you like human beings. Remember that enemies can become friends. Remember that there's always another choice." The truck pulled away, and Helene watched the camp disappear behind them. She carried 3 things with her: her documents, her supply package, and the memory of vanilla ice cream on a summer afternoon. The ice cream was long gone, melted and consumed, but the memory remained, perfect, preserved, a small moment of sweetness in an ocean of bitterness. The journey home took 3 weeks, by train, by ship, by truck again through a Germany that looked nothing like the country she'd left. Cities were rubble. People were skeletal with hunger. Children begged for food. American soldiers were everywhere, not as conquerors but as occupiers who seemed almost apologetic about being necessary. Helene arrived in Bavaria to find her aunt alive, but barely, living in a house with no roof, surviving on charity rations, traumatized and hollow-eyed. But slowly, impossibly, life began to rebuild. Helene found work in a hospital, or what passed for a hospital, really just a damaged building with some supplies and too many patients. She worked 18-hour days, treating malnutrition and tuberculosis and wounds that wouldn't heal. She told people about America, about ice cream, about kindness. Most didn't want to hear it. They were too angry, too bitter, too broken. But a few listened. A few remembered that before the Reich, Germany had been something else. A few were willing to try building something different. And then, in the summer of 1948, something miraculous happened. The Berlin airlift began. American and British planes dropping supplies into blockaded Berlin, feeding millions of Germans who the Soviets were trying to starve into submission. Helene heard about it on the radio and wept, because it proved what Captain Rodriguez had said, that peace was active work, that America really would feed its former enemies, that the ice cream hadn't been a trick or an anomaly. It was a glimpse of how these people actually operated, how they actually thought, how they actually valued human life, even when it would have been easier not to. She wrote to Private Miller, as she'd promised. Told him about her work, her aunt, the hospital, the slow, painful process of rebuilding. Told him about the airlift and what it meant. Told him that she kept her promise. She was telling people the truth, even when they didn't want to hear it. She was being kind when the world told her to be hard. She was remembering the ice cream, Miller wrote back 6 months later. He'd been discharged, was back in Iowa, working on his family's farm and attending college on the GI Bill. He was studying international relations, hoping to work in diplomacy, hoping to help prevent the next war. He said the ice cream had changed him too, that watching German nurses cry over vanilla had made him understand that enemies were just people, and that maybe his life's work should be building bridges instead of manning battlements. They corresponded for years. These two people from opposite sides of a terrible war, bound together by the memory of ice cream in an Arizona prison camp. They never met again. Miller died in 1973, Helene in 1989. But they maintained a friendship built on shared memory and mutual hope that the world could be better than it had been. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of Germany's surrender, a German television station interviewed Helene about her experiences. She was 66 years old then, retired from nursing, living with her niece's family. The interviewer asked the predictable questions about the war, about capture, about coming home. But then he asked something unexpected. What was the moment you realized Germany had lost more than just the war? That we'd lost something fundamental about who we were? Helene thought about it for a long moment. Then she smiled, a sad smile but genuine. It was ice cream, she said. Vanilla ice cream on the 4th of July in an American prison camp. That's when I understood that we'd been lied to about everything. That prosperity didn't require conquest. That kindness wasn't weakness. That the enemy wasn't who we'd been told. And that's when I knew that if we were going to rebuild Germany into something worth being proud of, we had to learn from that ice cream. We had to remember that small acts of kindness matter, that feeding people is important, that there's value in sweetness, in joy, in treating others with dignity, even when you don't have to. The new Germany, the Germany we've built over these 40 years, it's not perfect. But it's a Germany where children eat ice cream and don't think about war. And that's worth everything we lost to learn it. The interview aired on national television. Helene received hundreds of letters, some angry, some grateful, some just confused. But one letter stood out. It was from Miller's daughter, who'd seen the interview and wanted to thank Helene for being her father's friend, for helping him understand that reconciliation was possible, that enemies could become friends, that peace was worth fighting for. She included a photo, Miller in his later years, gray-haired and smiling, holding a bowl of vanilla ice cream at a family picnic. Helene kept that photo next to her bed until she died 4 years later. And when her niece cleaned out her room, she found dozens of letters, a faded document certifying repatriation status, and a handwritten recipe card in the margin of which someone had written in English, "Food is love." Everyone deserves to be full. Chef Rodriguez, July 4th, 1945. The recipe was for vanilla ice cream.